All right, let's continue on a little bit with some information about functions. And one of the things we're going to talk about is scoping and immutability. And this is something that can be a little tricky sometimes when you're first starting out. So I'm just trying to help you kind of understand how Python works. So let's create a function. Call it print info. And we use the def keyword to tell Python we're creating a function. We give it a name, and we say we don't take any sort of arguments. And what this does is it prints out the value of x. What is x? Well, that is a good question. So let's start out by just running the function. And most likely what we're going to find is an error. Yep, has no idea what x is. So if we defined x within the function, it would not have a problem with printing it. And so it prints 6, just like we thought, you might think. But what happens if you defined x here? If you defined it in the main part of the code and not there? So this is one of the tricky things about Python that can be very confusing, and it's something you really want to avoid, in my opinion, in how you code. So even though we did not give this variable to this function, it's still able to see it. So it's still able to see x is equal to 6. And so when we run print info and it prints x, it's able to grab the value of x and print it. So you might say, okay, this is fine. This is a lot easier. This way I don't have to pass in these arguments and tell it what to do. But the reason this is problematic, there's a number of reasons this is problematic. One is that if you don't name the variable correctly in your code, then it's not going to be able to find it. So you have to match the name of the variable here with the main name of the variable here. And also there's going to be very unexpected behaviors. So let's say we modify it like this. So we try to change the value of x to 2, and then we print it out. Does this work? Okay, it looks like it worked. So we printed out the value of x, and it's equal to 2. But what is unexpected is that if we now print out the value of x, and we're expecting the value of this to change by the function, then we expect to print out 2 twice, once here and once here. But what we find is that the value is 2, and then it's equal to 6. And so this statement right here does not actually change the value of x outside of the code. And so what's happening is it's creating a copy, a brand new variable of x, and it's setting that equal to 2. So this stuff gets very, very confusing. So you don't want to code like this. So remember, any sort of information, any sort of data that the function needs to operate really needs to be passed to it. And so if you want this function just to print something out, then you should give it you should pass the variable that you're trying to get the information for. So let's call it info variable. And now what we print out is this. And now let's see what happens when we run this code. So we're going to get an error. So think about it for a second and try to predict what the error is going to be. And the reason it doesn't work, print info is missing one required argument. So we have to send in the value. So now we're very explicitly saying, okay, this is the variable we want printed, and now this is the variable that the code will take and will name. And so now this is going to work. And so great, everything works. And so now there shouldn't be any sort of confusion. So if you change the variable to 2, you're not going to change. You shouldn't expect to change the value of x, and that's of course what you see. So we take in the value of x. This is initially 6, but then we set it equal to 2, and then we print it out here. So what's printed out here is 2, but we're not actually modifying the data that is passed to it. So another way to think about that is that you're actually making a copy. So you're copying this, whatever this variable is. So this is an integer, so you make a copy of x, and then you make a brand new variable called info variable. And this is in general how you want to code. Let's see. If you want to modify the original variable, what you should be doing is returning the value. So return info variable, and then set x equal to that value. So now originally x is equal to 6. We're going to send that to print info. Print info is going to change that value to 2. It's going to print 2, and then it's going to return the value of 2, which is going to override the value of x back from 6 to 2. And so now when we print it, we expect to see 2 2s. Awesome, that's how it works. One exception to this is lists, and you should know enough about Python to know why this isn't the case. But let's see what happens. So now we are taking x and we are setting it equal to a list, and it's equal to 1, 2, 3, and 4. And now let's say we take that list, so we call it a new name, so we make a copy of x and we call it info variable, and then we change the value of one of the elements to something different. Okay, so what we might expect to see if a list behaved like an integer is that this, when we printed out this, we would change one of the values, so it would be 1, 1, 3, 4. I'm sorry, let me also delete this. So let's go back to the former situation. So we have x, and we'll add this print statement one more time. And now let's actually see what happens when we run it. So why does this make sense? So we start the list value is equal to 1, 2, 3, 4. We print it out, and so everything looks right on the first time we print it out. We run this function. We send the list to print info. Python makes a copy of x and stores it in this new variable name called info variable. Then we modify the first index, the second element, and set it equal to 1, and then we print it out. And so now we see that 2 has become a 1. Now we print the value of x, and we find that it has been modified too. So x was also modified too. And this makes sense because we talked before, the default way that lists are copied is that's called a shallow copy. And so you're not sending the entire list, an entire copy of the list. You're just sending what might be called a pointer in other languages to the data, the list data. And so now when you modify it, you're actually modifying the original thing. So you're going to get some very weird errors if you're not familiar with this. So just try to remember, there are key differences between lists and strings and other numerical classes that allow it to be modified inside a function in situations where you might not be trying to. So I kind of summarized the 3 different take-home messages about how functions work. So one, you should always pass in as parameters or arguments all the variables and data that your function needs. Do not try to access a variable that isn't passed into the function. All output of a function should be returned using the return statement. Do not try to return the output by modifying the parameters that are passed in. And be very careful modifying lists in your functions, and then later you'll see this is also true with dictionaries and other objects. This is permanent and will modify the original data that you send in.